All right.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the League of California Cities Latino Caucus 2022 Midterm Election Result Analyst Webinar. My name is Ray Marquez, Latino Caucus Board Member and Mayor of Chino Hills. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. We look forward to hearing about the election season and finding out what it means for California Latinos. We should also like to take this time to thank our premier sponsor, Southern California Edison. Thank you for your continued support and for following the Latino Caucus to continue our work. I would like to introduce a good friend of ours, our speaker and longtime friend of the caucus, Dr. Fernando Guerra, Professor of Political Science and Chicano Studies at Loyola Marymount. Welcome, Dr. Guerra, and thank you for providing your expertise on this subject. Take it away, sir.
All right. Thank you, Ray. I greatly appreciate it. I've been interacting with the Latino Caucus of the California League of Cities for over 25 years, so it's a pleasure to do this. I have, unfortunately, I did not make it to my university office. Let's see if Jorge is on. Otherwise, I will have to share. So I am going to give you a PowerPoint presentation on some of the findings that we have. A lot of it is you're very, very familiar with, but overall, I just want to talk about the increasing number of Latino elected officials, number one, and the Latino vote in general. Let me make one generalization. More Latinos voted in the 2022 election than ever before in any midterm in absolute numbers. So that's the good news. The not so good news is that Latinos underperformed in terms of their percent of the vote, in terms of the percent for eligible population and registered voters. So that Latinos are exercising their ability to vote, but not to the same degree as other groups. And the impact could be tremendous. So for instance, in the city of Los Angeles, where we had a historic mayoral election, Latinos are 50% of the population. But as many of you know, that doesn't mean that you're eligible. The under 18 population is high, undocumented individuals, other immigrants who have status but not citizenship. And so only 36% of registered voters are Latino. So you go from 50 to 36. That's still a significant amount, over 1/3, right? However, in the June primary, only 21% of voters in Los Angeles were Latino. That's an underperformance of 36% registered to 21. In November, it got a little bit better, but not much, 25%. And so the good news is, in absolute numbers, more Latinos than ever. Number two, more Latino elected officials than ever. But the bad news is the underperformance. And this is completely and totally frustrating for someone like myself, who has been studying Latino politics for over 38 years. I've been at Loyola Marymount University for 38 years and have published significantly on the Latino vote and the incorporations and emergence of Latino elected officials. And I have always made the argument about systemic obstacles. I'm going to make this very broad statement, and that is that nowhere in America is it easier to vote than in California. California has incorporated every inclusive policy and law that exists out there. Now, there are still more that can be done. I'm not dismissing that, and there's still obstacles to overcome of previous exclusion and patterns of exclusion, and we could talk about that. But from a systemic perspective, you know, universal vote by mail, early voting, same-day registration, 16-year-old registration, you can go on and on. California wasn't the first to do many of these things because, you know, you had universal vote by mail in Colorado and Washington and Oregon before. You had early voting in other states before. But California is the state that has incorporated many of these changes to a much greater degree than anybody else, than any other state. We are the leaders from that perspective of getting rid of some of these common obstacles. Second, at the city level, and many of you are experiencing this, there's been a tremendous movement of moving elections from the odd year to the even year. Many cities in California have done that just in the last 5 years. And second, there's also been a tremendous movement of moving from at-large to district elections. Both of these moves are supposed to lead to greater Latino incorporation, greater Latino voting, and greater Latino elected officials. And in fact, all the data that we have shows that to be the case. Again, my apologies for using Los Angeles, the big city, the big monster in California cities as an example. But in full disclosure, I was the chair of the Electoral Reform Commission in the city of Los Angeles that put on the ballot to move the elections from odd year to even year. The number one reason I was a proponent of this would be the increasing number of participants, the number of voters. And it's not that we were increasing voter turnout, we were just moving it to where voter turnout is, and that is on the even years. And so that was, I think, a very significant move. One of the major arguments against moving city elections to even number of years is that it dilutes the attention on the city, that people will be paying attention more to federal elections, state elections, even county elections over city elections. I can tell you that nothing was further from the truth in Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles actually had a little bit higher turnout than the rest of the county, when historically that had not been the case. The lead election was the mayoral election. All of the conversation around elections were about the mayor, not the governor, not the US Senate, et cetera. And so that argument that it would dilute attention to city issues, to the city campaigns, just did not play out itself in this election cycle in Los Angeles. And I would say in other cities like San Jose and Oakland, et cetera, that also had mayoral elections. And so the point here is all of these reforms, moving to even year, having district elections, universal vote by mail, early voting, et cetera, have all been implemented. They have all led to increasing participation, but not to the significant level that we expected. And that's been disappointing. For instance, there is some research that indicate that universal vote by mail has increased turnout for everyone, but less so for Latinos. So that in fact, universal vote by mail, while it increased Latino turnout, it actually increased white and African-American turnout to a greater degree, increasing the gap between Latino voters and non-Latino voters. This is not a reason for us to be opposed to universal vote by mail. It's a reason for us to figure out how to mobilize. So that's point number one about the role of reforms, how they played out in this election. It was really one of the things that we've talked about is this was going to be the base election, because every election starting from 2022 on would be very similar. 2020 we held during COVID. 2018 was that incredible midterm election when we and so we've not had a what I would call a base generic election. Every single election has been different in the last 3 or 4 cycles. We expected this election to then set the base for what we're going to see in the next couple of election rounds. So point number one, reform has changed and created opportunities for greater inclusion, for more Latino representation. That's very important. Point number two, many talk about the Latino vote and the difference that the Latino vote made in many elections, that they were the difference. And so that if you were to add up all the Latino vote, it really changed. If Latinos hadn't voted for that person, they provided the margin of victory. The challenge for that is that almost any group can say that the closer an election is, the more that multiple groups provided the margin of victory. And so in many of the situations where we make that analysis or we make that point that Latinos provided the margin of victory, there are 4 or 5 other groups, demographic groups, whether it's young voters, whether it's suburban voters, whether it's female voters or whoever, who also provided the margin of victory. And we're not alone in that analysis. And so I just basically want to say to people to be careful with that analysis, because while it may be true mathematically, it isn't true politically, in the sense that there are many other groups that find themselves in that same situation. That's, I think, a second point. And third, while it was disappointing in terms of some pockets of Latino turnout, there were other pockets where turnout for Latinos were a little bit higher than other areas. And so they point to the necessary conditions or areas where we can learn from and increase participation amongst Latinos. So giving you these three different points about reform, the margin of victories, and pockets of overperformance that we need to examine, and contrary to that, also pockets of underperformance that we need to examine for the future. Let's take a look at some of the results. I'll go to the first slide and talk about federal elections. As we all know, this is not news to you. The Democrats are going to hold the majority in the U.S. Senate, whether it's 50-50 or 51-49. And you, I think, all know about that. And you know that there's going to be a runoff election, which is a very strange law that they have in Georgia. And by the way, that law really is a way to try to prevent not only at the state level, but at other levels, to keep African Americans from winning votes when things were split. It's an old system, a way of doing things that I think they should get rid of, but it exists, and you all know about that. From a Latino perspective, many of you know that there are 6 Latino U.S. senators, 3 of them of Mexican American origin, 3 of them of Cuban American origin. 4 of them are Democrats, 2 of them are Republicans. Of the 6, 3 were up for election in 2022, and all 3 won. 2 of them very easily, Alex Padilla and Marco Rubio in Florida. But we all know that Catherine Cortez Masto barely won. Again, there's the whole analysis that Latinos did make a difference in that election. They provided an overwhelming support. Had no Latino voted in this election, she would have lost. That's one way of really figuring out whether, in fact, Latinos make a difference. Deduct the Latinos from both sides, and we would see what would happen. And in that particular case in Nevada, that definitely would be the case. And so that's at the federal level. Going next slide, we take a look at the U.S. House. As many of you know and heard, the Republicans will hold a majority. It's going to be very close. There's still some elections to be decided, including here in California, the 13th district. But you see a lot of that red wave did not emerge for the House of Representatives. But I will say that there were red waves in pockets of the nation, specifically Florida. There was a red wave in Florida. All the statewide offices went Republican. They captured more congressional, more state legislative seats, more local seats than ever before. There was definitely a tremendous red wave in Florida. But even in Los Angeles, even in California, there were pockets of red wave. Orange County, and before I get there, let me just say, you see that there's 52 representatives in California now, down from 53. We lost one because of apportionment, and you see that 40 of the seats have been won by Democrats, 11 by Republicans, and 1 has not been called, though the Republican there, John Duarte, is leading. That would be a pickup of 1 seat for the the Republicans in California, and the loss of 2 seats by Democrats, 1 that went to another state, and then 1 that they would lose to the Republicans. By the way, 13 of the seats have been won by Latinos. Of those 13, 12 are Democrats, 1 Republican, and those 12 Democrats represent over close to 1/3 of the entire Democratic delegation from California. Let me go to the next slide. And here we're talking about the red wave. This is the competitive House races. Obviously, it's not counting the 13th, which is the most competitive, but these were competitive beginning in 2018. If you recall the 2018 midterm 4 years ago, there was a tremendous push by Democrats, and Democrats captured these 6 seats that are listed here, were all in Republican hands in 2016. In 2018, the Democrats won all 6 of them. Then in 2020, Republicans recaptured 4 of them. and these are considered the competitive, going from Republican to Democrat, back to Republican, except for two of them. And now we're going to see what was going to happen in this election. And you see that the Republicans were able to keep the 4 that they had won in 2020, and that Katie Porter and Mike Levin in Orange County were able to keep their seats. And so focus on this is that talking about the red wave, there were pockets of red wave even in California, and I would say Orange County. Orange County was the only county that Governor Newsom didn't win on the coast. It was the only county that he didn't win in Southern California. And then the Republicans did extremely well at the congressional level. They kind of held their own in the state legislative seats, and even in some local seats, they were able to win. And so this is the competitive seats. And I think for the next round in 24, we're probably going to have to drop 1 or 2 of these as competitive and add the 13th and 1 or 2 others. We'll take a look at that. The next one. And California, it was kind of a sleepy election for the state. All statewide constitutional offices were won by the Democrats. 7 out of the 8 were incumbents running for re-election. All the judges at the state level and most the state level were confirmed, and then all the propositions that had major fundings did not pass. There was close to $1 billion spent on propositions, and the proposition that had the most money, all of them lost. We oftentimes say that money wins in politics, and even with this election, 95% of candidates who had more money won. But that's not always a given, as we saw with Rick Caruso in Los Angeles, but also in all these propositions. Those who were outspent actually did not did quite well. And again, in the state Senate and state assembly, there are still some seats to be called. But irrespective of how those seats go, Democrats will keep a supermajority, 2/3 in both the state Senate and state assembly. The next one. And some local races of note. I just put down the major mayor runs, and you see that these were basically all Democrat versus Democrat. You see Karen Bass winning in Los Angeles, Rex Richardson, the first African-American mayor of Long Beach. San Jose, you had Cindy Chavez. It's basically really, if you update it, it's 50-50 still, very close. I think it's been called though. And you saw also the sheriff. We had Robert Luna here in Los Angeles, but you also had a Latina elected sheriff down in San Diego County. You also had a Latina win supervisor in Riverside County, basically changing the politics of that county from a Republican majority, even though they are nonpartisan offices, to a Democratic majority with 2 of the 3 Democrats being Latino. I'm going to stop here and just make and we can have some discussion and make the point that at every level, there are more Latinos now than ever before, beginning with U.S. Senator Alex Padilla, all the way down to school board and college board positions. The numbers are just significant and growing. NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected Officials, puts out a roster every year that talks about the number of elected officials. Interestingly enough, I often find many that are left out, but it shows you the tremendous number of an impact. Irrespective of the underperformance of the Latino vote, there's an overperformance of Latino candidates winning not only majority Latino seats, but many winning Latino plurality seats and even Latino minority seats where Latinos are not the majority. And so Latino candidates are doing extremely well. I'll stop here and turn it over to Ray or Erica to field some questions, and we can continue to have a discussion. Erica, Ray?
Thank you, sir. Excellent. Go ahead, Erica.
Well, it looks like we just have one question right now is, will these slides be available?
Absolutely. I'm going to send them to Erica and to Ray. And then I think, Erica, you're going to put them on your website. And then anybody who wants them can either download them from there, or Erica could send them to you directly. It's all public information. One of the things that we do at Loyola Marymount University is we conduct one of the largest exit polls in the country per capita. We've always done an exit poll of either the city or the county, and we've done about 17 of these. They've been tremendously accurate, and we've been able to even call an election like 10, 15 minutes after the polls close. But that methodology actually doesn't work in the modern election of universal vote by mail. The way we used to do it is, since 95% of people up to 2016 used to vote, well, in the 2010, 2014, used to vote in person, that had decreased to about 30% started voting universal vote by mail. Well, excuse me, started voting vote by mail, not universal vote by, but started voting by mail throughout California and even in LA County. But beginning in 2020, there was universal vote by mail, meaning that people didn't go to the polls. So we couldn't interview them as they exited from the polls. That's what an exit poll is. You poll people as they exit, and you ask them, what did you do 5 minutes ago? And they tend to be extremely accurate. And so we were not able to do that this year. And we're trying a new methodology where we're actually interviewing as people submit their ballots and they get to the registrar recorder. There is a record of who's actually submitted it. And then we draw a sample from that and interview them throughout the early voting period and then throughout the 8th to try to get a sense of that. We haven't perfected it yet, so we didn't release any of that data, and we're still looking at that.
Perfect. And there's one more question from Rebecca Garcia asking, how did Latinos vote by age group?
So one of the things that is one of the big stories nationally is the increasing youth vote. The young people voted more than ever before. However, they still lag dramatically from other age groups. I know some people didn't capture, the story was, oh, tremendous growth of the tremendous growth of the youth voted, et cetera. Many people thought, oh, they voted higher than, 30-year-olds or 40-year-old, 50 or 60. No, they were still the least, the group that voted the least, okay? And so Latino youth also saw an increase, but again, it lagged in terms of the increase that we saw amongst white youth or African-American youth, and especially in California. One of the weird things that we saw was that the turnout for the midterm was a record in 2018. And we saw many states maintain that level. But the 4 largest states in America, California, New York, heavily Democratic, and Florida and Texas, heavily Republican, both saw a decline in their vote, but overall, and even with Latinos. And of course, Latinos are heavily concentrated in these 4 states, especially California, Texas, and Florida. And so you saw, while more Latino youth voted than ever before, it's not the same as white youth or others. Again, we underperformed in just about every demographic category in terms of the Latino vote.
Perfect. And it looks like there's one more, although you offered many ways that we are making voting more accessible, but there was a question. Any thoughts on how to make voting more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's all kinds of different ways, but they're beyond the basic reforms that a lot of political scientists or generically we talk about. I think we've exhausted the reforms of tweaking the laws. I think one of the ways to do this is, unlike in other countries, we don't use government for turnout. We think we rely on campaigns and the political party, and we say that government shouldn't be involved in really having or trying to mobilize people. And you do see, especially here in Los Angeles County, the registrar did spend a lot of money, including billboards, reminding people, number one, to when the election was and how to vote. They justified their advertisement, which wasn't significant compared to the campaigns, but they justified it saying, we have a new system of voting. We have to educate voters about universal vote by mail, by early voting, how to vote once they get to the voting centers, and how to find those. And so they had basically an education and awareness program where they were advertising. There's no reason why the state of California or the 58 counties can't really mobilize and inform people about the election. And so they have a lot of money. I mean, the registrar recorders don't have a lot of money. They'll tell you they're underfunded, but the state had a lot of money. And they could have been very proactive about informing voters about the election. That's one potential. We got to get away with this idea that the state doesn't play that role. It shouldn't be partisan. It shouldn't try to turn out the vote of one particular group over the other, but it should play that major role. Other ideas is, the queues that people have. I know we have this tremendous history in California of nonpartisan local offices. In the California Constitution, any office from county below has to be nonpartisan. Well, it shows that individuals have a greater turnout in terms of partisanship when they know a political party. And that's just the overwhelming data. And many of us say, well, you should vote for the person, not the party. Others disagree. A party tells you it's the number one queue that we use. And so we don't have that queue at the local level. And so the idea of changing that. Another idea is to allow for non-citizens to vote in local elections. There is actually, that's not prohibited in the US Constitution. It is prohibited in the Constitution to vote in federal elections, but throughout American history, we have allowed many non-citizens to vote in local elections, especially in the East Coast. New York used to allow them up until the late 40s, and today in Maryland, there are about 6 or 7 cities that allow that type of voting. And one of the reasons they changed it in New York was because in the late 40s, several communists got elected to the New York City Council, and they thought that one of the reasons that happened is that they allowed too many immigrants to vote, and so they changed that law. And so that is a law, and I would suggest strongly, especially for school boards, we should allow undocumented parents. The number one thing we know about education policy is the more engaged the parent is, the greater it is for that child's education. Then the very first thing we tell them is, no, you can't participate in elections. So that's an idea that one can have. You could also have, I think, if could increase turnout in terms of the impact of the vote, is the ranked choice voting that you see in the cities of Oakland, San Francisco, and Richmond. That I think you're going to see an increase in that choice. You also have it in smaller cities, like I believe Palm Desert out in the Coachella Valley has ranked choice voting, and that I think increases turnout. But listen, at the end of the day, we continue to depend on individual campaigns and the political party for turnout. These, and you all know it because you've all ran campaigns. These campaigns are not sustainable. They only care about the candidate, and that's their role. They get set up to elect a particular candidate, and so they target individuals who are quote unquote likely voters, and they communicate to them. I know of at least 40 different studies by young Latino political scientists or others who have focused on specific precincts or neighborhoods or cities in small case studies, and then they run an experiment where they mail and inform people about the election, and then they track another similar precinct where they don't do that, and you see an increase. The more you communicate, you send the right message, the right messenger, the turnout will increase. The challenge is how to sustain that and how to scale that from one election to the other. There is no organization, including the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, that sustains mobilization from one election to the other. And finally, I'll end with this radical idea, and I call it voteria.
Mhm.
And voteria is the idea that we would, every election, given how much money we spend, we could either get some significant donor or even the state, although I don't think the state would go for this, and say, if you vote, we are going to randomly select someone who voted, and we have that data, and we could do an algorithm and run it, and someone will win $1 million in each county or in each city or something like that. And all of a sudden, you know, you see that you get lotto mania when all these things are happening. That attention, that would increase turnout tremendously. Now, people say that might not work, but believe it or not, a couple of years ago, we tried an experiment in a special election for LAUSD, and we offered, I think it was $50,000. And we then followed up with some research, and it showed that it increased turnout by about 8% in a special election. The city, some folks in Philadelphia saw that we had done this experiment, and they tried it, and they've now done it 2 or 3 times. But there's a sense that it cannot be done when there's a federal election, given some laws. But that's an idea that we could increase turnout.
I like it.
Yeah.
We have 2 more questions. I think you touched upon this. Do you think the practice of nonpartisanship at the local level has diminished based on the influx of funding coming in for both parties for seats on the city council and board of supervisors?
Yeah, I mean, I on the one hand, I'm very supportive of nonpartisan elections. It's part of our California history. It has served us well in general. But nonpartisan elections do, and the research is pretty overwhelming, it does dilute the incorporation of Latinos and African Americans. It has an impact. Again, research, not only survey research, but experimental research, and then also looking at the data, individuals use partisanship as a cue, both Republicans and Democrats. And when they go to the ballots and they see, hey, who's a Democrat, and they can't tell, it deflates that vote. And so I think it would be very tough to change that given our culture in California. But you see the Democratic Party and the Republican Party sometimes endorse, more so the Democratic Party because it has an advantage, and they will endorse a candidate. But because the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are not really centralized, you get these conflicting endorsements where the county Republican Party endorses somebody else, but then the Republican club of X or whatever endorses somebody else, and it gets very confusing. There's no discipline, there's no hierarchical organization within each party, and so the parties are very, very weak in California, and so they can't take or help out in terms of muting the nonpartisanship of these local elections. I'll also tell you that if you take a look at the dominance of Democrats at the partisan level, when voters know, they overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. We just saw the data, 2/3 majority in the state legislature, every single statewide elected office, et cetera. But at the county level, there have been several studies done, especially by City Lab and others, that shows that Republicans tend to win to a greater extent in nonpartisan elections because the voters don't know the Republicans. And some people may say that's good because then they're like speaking to the issues and not being partisan, and that if they get too partisan or take on too many of the issues that Republicans, talk about at the national level, that they would lose possibly. But it does show that there's an overrepresentation of Republican county officials and an overrepresentation of Republican city officials based on the voting patterns for partisanship in their districts based on the registration patterns in their districts. But again, voters not knowing that makes a difference.
Perfect. And then the last one I see here is, do you think the young Latino vote will increase in 2024?
Yes and no. What I think the big story in Los Angeles and even in California is the emergence of the progressives. And, we are a one-party state. I mean, take a look at the statewide election results. There was only one open seat, for state controller, okay? And the Democratic nominee, Malia Cohen, good person. I've met her. I was very impressed with her. But then the Republican Lanhee Chen, he worked for the Obama administration, worked for the Trump administration at Stanford. Incredible guy. I would say, in terms of experience and what they brought, he, I think, from an objective perspective, was more qualified. But he's a Republican. Second, during the campaign, it came out that Malia Cohen had a bankruptcy, that she allowed some of her business licenses to expire, et cetera, and she's running for controller. Now, she came up with reasons why it didn't happen and all that. So even in this environment, an open seat, a more qualified Republican candidate, a Democratic candidate who had some issues specifically relevant to controller, and she still won by close to 10 points. And so there is, one party dominance. And so what's happening in California as a one-party state, though, is there is an emerging differences within the Democratic Party or within Democrats. And I would categorize them loosely as liberal Democrats, probably most of us on this call, or, like Karen Bass, longtime people, moderate Democrats, people who previously had been, moderate Republicans, or people who are just a little bit more conservative. They believe in democratic values, but, not as much, not on all those issues. Again, some of us on this call like that. But then the new emergence of the progressive Democrats. So think about those three camps, with liberal Democrats dominating, right? And so there was a repudiation in my mind amongst the liberal Democrats, because at the local level in many areas, because they hadn't met the moment of COVID, of the economy, but many of these individuals didn't want to vote for a Republican. And so they voted for progressives. And here in Los Angeles City, the big story is not that Karen Bass won, is how many progressives won. And I'm talking progressives. These are like Social Democrats of America endorsed candidates who these candidates actually ran on that platform. One of them on abolitionist of the police department, et cetera, young people and young people of color. And so you have now Hugo Soto Moreno, Social Democrat of America, on the LA City Council. You have Ulises Hernandez, an abolitionist, on the city council. You have Kenneth Mejia, who got elected citywide for controller, a total leftist. And I don't mean leftist in a negative way, because I'll be honest with you, I voted for him. I thought it would be awesome to have a young person who's a CPA, who's anti-establishment, looking at the books and questioning everything. To me, in my mind, he was like a perfect type of a candidate. And these progressives won with their ability to mobilize young people and appeal to young people. They had a much greater message. And if you take a look in their districts, the youth vote was much, much greater. And so liberal Democrats, like many of us on this call, moderate Democrats, we haven't learned how to appeal to the youth vote, okay? And the other example here on the is Rick Caruso running for mayor of LA, former Republican. We put him in the moderate Democrat category. He did what many of us on this call have been asking people to do, and that is spend money in the Latino community, craft a message in the Latino community. And I could tell you there's been no candidate who spent more money on the Latino vote than Rick Caruso. Okay. And it didn't work. Yes, he got a higher vote of the Latino vote than many expected at the beginning, but he didn't increase turnout tremendously, you know, and he spent millions of dollars. We have all been making the argument, spend money here and turnout will increase. He did it. Turnout increased a little bit, not much. And so it's if somebody takes a lesson from that, it's not good for Latino politics or Latino mobilization.
Got it. So those were all of the questions from the crowd. Should I turn it over to you, Fernando, and have more commentary?
Yeah, sure. You know, one of the things is we have to figure out how to increase the Latino vote. And we also have to figure out so you have mobilization. And mobilization is about campaigning, organizing. The models that we have are barely keeping us afloat. We need to develop new models to engage and have Latinos turn out. That's number one. Number two, we have to figure out if there is such thing as the Latino agenda, right? What is the Latino agenda? Survey after survey, and including those surveys that I am the principal investigator of here at Loyola Marymount University, shows that Latinos have very similar issues, or their agenda is very similar to non-Latinos. You know, number one is always about the economy and jobs, housing, education, especially, and crime and public safety, although it's viewed a little bit differently. All those things are the top issues for Latinos, as they are for whites, African Americans, Republicans, and Democrats. We view it a little bit differently, but those are the same. Where Latinos do differ is that we put issues of immigration in the top 10, maybe 6, 7, or 8, depending on who you are. And and then for most white Democrats or African Americans, it's not in the top 10. But for many conservatives and Republicans, it is in the top 10, but in a very different perspective. How do we stop immigration? Whereas for Latinos, is how do we incorporate immigrants? How do we service those that are here? Most Latinos are not for open borders. More Latinos are not for increased immigration, but they're talking about immigration, immigrants who are already here. And there's a different view of a immigrant, Mexican, Central American, or from wherever. Once they cross over, they view them differently than they're on the other side. And so that how to develop that agenda, what are our policy preferences, and the nuances of what we mean when we say we think immigration is important, or what we say in terms of public safety, and what we mean about criminal justice reform. I will tell you that earlier talked about that we are a one-party state, California, while there's tremendous consensus, there's also, I like to remind people that Donald Trump got more votes in California in 2020 than any other state in absolute numbers, okay? And people say, wait, how could that be? Texas, Florida, he actually got more votes, barely, in California than he did in Texas, okay? And so there are a lot of Republicans in absolute numbers, but just as a percentage, they are lower, obviously. And they are concentrated on the inland eastern part of the state. But if you take the coast and Southern California, there is a tremendous consensus amongst Californians, and there are basically very few, if little, wedge issues. And so the policy preference that you see for Latinos is very similar to that of others in the pockets that they find themselves. And so that's something that we've been tracking. So it is let me see here. So, there's different ways of trying to increase participation. There's another question about participatory budgeting to help and engage. I think in principle, that is a great idea. In practice, you have the same individuals coming out and dominating the narrative, less than 1% of the population. How many of you have had a community hearing and 2 or 3 people show up? How many of you have had hearings for a land use decision, or when you were redistricting and you had community forums and you advertise and you talk about it over and over and you have 10 people show up? It's really tough to do that. My perspective, again, this is a bias as an academic, as someone who does polling, is I can select a random group of people in your city and ask them and craft a survey that talks about their budget priorities, but for some reason people say, no, people have to come and participate. Well, people don't have the time. Sometimes they don't have the information. But if you go to them and ask them specifically with very well-crafted questions, and you randomly select, not have them self-select, not have an organization mobilize them to come out and really present one particular interest or perspective, that's one way that you could do. We have methods to really figure out what people in your city are thinking about. We know how to do that academically, and we're very accurate. Contrary to all this narrative about polling is wrong, the vast majority of polls conducted in a method that we all consider the right method were right in this election. The polls were extremely correct, right? And even when people go back to 2016, the polls got it all wrong. No, the polls were within the error margin, so there's this narrative that polling has gone wrong. Everybody thinks they can do a poll. And so if you listen to the polls done by amateurs, yeah, they're wrong. But if you do only take a look at the polls conducted by people who've been doing them for a long time, have no bias one way or the other, they're extremely accurate and continue to be accurate. And if you really want participatory budgeting or participatory decision, that is a method that is available to cities. But yet, when we talk about, hey, let's have a engagement, let's go out there and know what the community does, and we'll have a meeting in this high school, whatever, and then the elected official from that area turns out his people and all that. It's not that's not a random selection. That's a biased selection of the same interests that continue to come out to talk about these things.
Fantastic. And I have just one quick question, Fernando. Last election season, and we had a lot of newly elected Latinos join us as members. One of the things that we noticed was that, and this is talking not about the voters, but the actual candidates and the actual, newly elected, a lot of young Latino council members, and some actually were new citizens. They became new citizens and turned right around and ran for office and won their offices. Are there anything that you're noticing about those who have won this season of election to comment on and see what those trends are looking like for us?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the high cost of housing has led many young Latinos who graduate from Loyola Marymount, the UCs, the Cal States, the other privates, to go back to their hometown because of housing costs more than anything else, and familiarity, of course, and get engaged. And you see this in Los Angeles County along the southeast corridor, the 710 freeway, where the number of new council members has been tremendous. All Latino, they were Latino before, but now increasing Latino, but all young and all who grew up in that area. That's a really a new phenomena. I know we see this phenomena in more of the rural counties or the, I-5 99 corridor in the San Joaquin Valley. That's not unusual, but it was unusual here in Los Angeles County. And you're seeing that tremendously change, that you see much younger individuals winning for public office. And it used to be not unusual when I started studying who were the elected officials. They were that even the Latinos tended to be real estate agents, local business people, etc. And you still have a lot of those, but you have many, many more young individuals. There was a city in the Southeast when this first transition happened, and all 5 council members were under the age of 35. Okay, and 3 of the 5 actually still lived with their parents. Okay, and so that's a very different dynamic. Not that that's happening in every city, but you just see those changes occurring, and the incorporation of a younger and younger, and obviously more women. You see in the state Senate, I believe there's going to be 12 Latinos out of the 40, the highest number ever. Excuse me for a second. You see them, and they are out of the 12, 10 are women. Okay, and then the other thing that you see is the very first generation of individuals that were elected. The Edward Royalballs and the Art Torres and Richard Alatorre and people like that, Richard Polanco, they were all U.S. born, all of them, and it's not until about 10 years ago that you started seeing foreign born, now U.S. citizens getting elected. But they have been, interestingly enough, they were brought here or came to the U.S. as young children. Now you are seeing even people who came here after they were 18 who are now getting elected. So you see 3 stages, almost no immigrants being elected, immigrants who really are culturally Americans because they really grew up here in the U.S. Some of them, even though they were born in Mexico or Central America, don't even speak Spanish anymore. And now you see a group of Latinos who are immigrants after they're 18 who are getting elected at the local level. It's a really interesting dynamic.
We think so too. So that has exhausted the questions that we have here. I will turn it back over to Ray and Fernando.
Fernando, this is Ray Marquez. First of all, Professor, I just want to say thank you for your time and the informative presentation that you provided us today. The people on the webinar, I want to say thank you. The Latino Caucus is pleased to present educational programming such as this to equip you with necessary knowledge and leadership skills to better serve your communities. The Latino Caucus strives to educate and inform local elected officials on issues unique to Latino communities. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions, and contact information will be provided at the chat. Thank you very much. Anything else, Professor?
No, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate the work that all of you do. Putting yourselves out there to become an elected official is, especially given the pay. I mean, talk about, trying to incorporate, I think there should be a state law that council members get paid a lot more than they're currently getting paid, maybe based on population or something of that nature, where you're not forced to say, hey, we want to get paid more. Given the work you do, you completely underpaid. And I think we all know that. So I want to thank everybody for the service that you provide. And thank you also for the opportunity to present this data.
Again, sir, thank you so much.
All right.
You have a good day now.
Thank you so much. We have left our website and our Facebook link inside the chat. So if anyone wants to reach us, please go there. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Signing out.